Hello, everybody. We are back with another Cherie and Elizabeth Talk Sports. I am Elizabeth Emery from Hear Her Sports, and I am once again back with my lovely co-host, Cherie Turner. How are you doing?
I am doing really great, Elizabeth. But before I talk about anything, we've got to talk about this poster because I'm always so excited when you get a new poster.
I did get a new poster, and I actually have one waiting, so we're going to get another one the next time. But this is Bonnie Blair. She, of course, is a super stud speed skater from back in the day. And I just love that it's an advertising poster. You can see the Skippy.
Yes,
And,
I love
they're
that.
just, again, this goes back to everything I've been saying about women's sports posters is there just so few of them. And so I just love that Skippy did sponsor Bonnie Blair. So I'm very excited about this one.
Yeah, and it does always surprise me sort of who pops up to support efforts like this. Like, who'd have thought Skippy? Like, I don't think of Skippy and think like champion of women's sports.
Right,
Like it's
right.
just, it seems very random. But, I
Yeah,
mean, peanut butter is good for you. I don't know. Some of the stuff Skippy puts in their peanut butter is a little questionable, but let's applaud them for their
yeah.
efforts to support a woman speed skater, which, speed skating, like we love all these sports that aren't particularly popular on the world stage, except for during the Olympics. But I really applaud them for, not only sponsoring someone in a sort of niche sport, but also a woman and a
Yeah.
long time ago.
And I remember her being super
Yes,
popular when I was a kid. I just
that's true.
remember sort of how excited everybody was about what she was doing. It was sort of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what are you going to talk about? What's your update?
Well, my update is actually our topic for the day, and we are
Oh,
talking about
okay.
menstrual cycles.
Yay.
We are going to dive right in and go to the topic of destigmatizing menstrual cycles, periods, all that sort of stuff. And this comes on the heels of me doing a podcast episode about Camille Herron's experiences at Western States the last weekend of June. And she had come out after the race. And we talked about this last week as well,
Hmm.
or maybe it was 2 weeks ago at this point, but about how she came out on Instagram talking about how she'd gotten her period during the race. And I was so excited to hear her talk about this in a public forum. She's a very public figure, and she talked about how her period impacted her. And I was like, we really need more women talking about this. And she and I connected to have her be on the show and tell her whole story, which I did not realize there was so much backstory to what led up to her having her period in the race. And it had to do a lot with the fact that she focused so much on her menstrual health ever since she was a kid. Since the time she was 14 when she got her first period, she understood that menstrual health was really important to her performance and recovery and her overall health as an athlete or as a human
Which is
being.
amazing, by the way. Like, how
Yes,
did she
I
know that?
agree. Right. Yeah. And I don't know, she says, she grew up in Oklahoma. She credits her parents,
Hmm.
and she credits the culture that she was in, that it
Right.
was, it was important to eat. Within her team culture, like nutrition was important for performance. And it was just all the messages that we really hope young women receive. And she
Hmm.
did. And it has benefited her greatly.
Sure.
And I'll just follow up to say that she also talked about how she decided to end using oral contraception about 6 months ago. And that is what had led to her having this sort of off cycle. This, for her, the reason why she got her period at Western States was because she was a little bit late. She thinks it's because there was some stress involved, which can throw off your cycle, which she was concerned about. Um, but anyways, and so on we go. And then she talks about sort of the problem solving during the race. And yeah, so I'm going to just lob this back to you for a second there, Elizabeth, because I know you
Yeah,
listened to the episode and we've been
I
talking about
did.
this.
So, just in comment too, I really liked when she said, okay, she was late, and then said it was because she was stressed, and then she said she could fix it. And that to me,
Right.
I don't know if I would have been like, oh, it was because I was stressed, and just sort of accepted that stress means that I might be late, rather than I can sort of manipulate my stress or counterbalance my stress through nutrition, which I thought was fantastic. That A, she thought of that, and B, she has a nutritionist that is sort of on board with figuring that stuff out. So that
Well,
was really
right.
cool.
Yeah, and there's so many things that came up for me when I was doing this, because I think there is a lot of that acceptance. It's like, oh, well, that's just what happens. And it's like,
Right.
well, that isn't just what happens. There's something causing it. And this kind of goes back to, like, it's so important to talk about these things, because as we share this information and we bring these things to light and we talk about the fact that, like, no, there's solutions. You just need to
Right.
find the team to work with you to find them, and that it's really important to your overall health. And so she does have this nutritionist, and they are troubleshooting her different nutritional needs. And it's this sort of thing that is going to help everybody.
Sure.
So obviously we tell these stories because we want to empower other people too. So while this is a story about Camille Herron and her menstrual cycle, this is also a story that can hopefully be a jumping off point for other people to talk about these things and share information.
Right. I mean,
So
my solution would not necessarily be the same as Camille Herron's, but
right.
knowing that I could look for a solution is a big deal. And the other thing I liked about the episode was that she talked about hormones and how all of that gets disrupted with these different things. You know, yeah, I just really like that. And I think that we forget that so much that goes on in our body is hormones. Like our thyroid
Yes.
is dictated by hormones, our brain is dictated by hormones. It's like all this stuff that like can go wrong that we attribute to something else is actually could very well be our hormones.
Yeah, hormone imbalance. And
Yeah.
yeah, and as I was thinking about, like, describing why I felt like this episode is so important, because it's not just about, like, oh, let's talk about periods. That is a big part of it. Like, let's just get over this squeamishness around this,
Hmm.
And it was funny because somebody made a comment of, like, if ultra runners can talk about pooping all the time, we can certainly handle talking about menstruating. And I thought, yeah, that's true.
It's so true. Oh my gosh, that's great. Yeah.
So that really, because I do recognize that, like, people feel squeamish, and I want to help present things in ways that it's like, no, really, it's okay to talk about this. And even though it can be uncomfortable, and that's even something that I talked to Camille a little bit about, was like, it's, or I made the commentary that, it is uncomfortable in a public forum to talk about, like, oh my God, I just got my period, but it's real and it does happen and it has an impact. And just recognizing that and bringing it to light, and just making it not a big deal, is really important. And then when you kind of get over the, like, it just isn't a big deal. It's just like, oh, well, that wasn't that hard.
Right.
Like, it's
Right.
just not that
Well,
big of it's just
yeah.
not that hard.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. This comes, like it's a nice dovetail with all the discussion about the tennis whites and also the
Oh,
soccer team white shorts. It's just like, you know, of course women don't want to wear white when they might get their period. But then I recently read an interesting article that we will link in the show notes. It's sort of like, what would be so bad if people saw blood stains on their white shorts? If your team wants white, you have to accept that that might happen. And, like,
right.
why make it a big deal? Maybe somebody has to run off the field, change his shorts or not. And I just was really fascinating to think about, how I first went into it, like, oh no, white shorts, forget it. But then thinking, oh, it's not so bad, you know.
Well, right. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, make us wear white shorts. We menstruate, by the way, and they might turn red.
Right.
It's just like, take your
Yeah.
pick. Well,
Right.
what would you prefer? And we've seen in the running world other situations where women have come out and talked about their periods, and there have been some sort of famous situations where women have free bled during a race, and
Mhm.
as a way of, like, trying to destigmatize this whole thing. It's like, this happens, people.
Right. Right.
uh
Well, it's
and
interesting.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like, it's interesting. Would a woman have come up with white shorts?
No.
Right.
We wouldn't have.
But also, would a man who lived in a culture where it was normal to talk about periods have come up with white shorts? Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and speaking of males or, of men, I have been just, I always am so pleasantly surprised when guys step up and say, like, yeah, we're on board with this. I saw a few comments from some coaches who are like, yeah, like we're totally supportive of destigmatizing this and being able to talk about it like with our athletes. And
Hmm.
there's a little something special that happens in my heart when there are these men who really get it and really step up. And we use this word allyship a lot, but it does make me think that it's so critically important that everybody's on board, and this isn't just women being like, we want to talk about
Oh,
periods, because it's not about like, oh, we want to throw this in your face, or like, we want to talk about periods. It's like, no, we just want to be able to talk about our health and our well-being, and this is a big part of it. And it is just something that happens, and we just need to get over it. Get over this squeamishness.
well, I mean, the other thing, in some men are coaches, and they're coaches of women, and so they have to
Right.
be able to address that in a normal, non-squeamish kind of way. I mean, I think back at my coaching, and I wonder if any of the men ever mentioned period, which certainly had an impact on my performance or my ability to train, or you know, mood, all this stuff. And
Right.
if I wasn't talking to them about it, then you know, that's kind of
Well, it's
a
yeah.
big gap. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it does have a big impact on, well, and this is a lot of what Stacey Sims and other coaches now are tuning into, is like training around your menstrual cycle
Yeah.
and how important that is.
Right.
And if we don't have male coaches who can talk about those things, then we're missing out on a lot of benefits to that sort of approach to training.
Hmm.
And that has been a big discussion. I've even had that discussion with some of my running friends about, like, well, you know is it inappropriate for a male coach to ask a female athlete if she's had her period? And it's just like, wow, we really need to be able to get past this one, because it should not be feel like a weird violation for a coach to be able to ask his athlete about her health and her
Right.
state of being.
Right.
um yeah. And the fact that that is a squeamishness, like, does it makes me think about the other ways women are viewed that feel very inappropriate for a male
Mhm.
coach, female athlete relationship. So, not to go too far down that road,
Yeah.
but
I have a fun anecdote about your episode.
oh,
And
please.
so I was at a race this weekend, and there was a young athlete, and she has had some eating issues. And so I was able to tell her about this episode. And the reason I was so happy to be able to tell her about the episode was because she had some hormone, like I can't remember exactly which marker was during her blood work was low, and I was like, that's probably because she's not been getting her period, and so I was
Oh,
able to
yeah.
share this episode, and it was such a comprehensive episode that it did get into the possible repercussions of losing your period. But also, it was really interesting to hear this kid's story because she's in high school, and she started having eating issues during health class after some lessons on nutrition in health class, which I thought was really
Oh,
interesting.
wow.
And it turns out that the teacher said that, and I don't know if the class was girls and boys, but anyway, the girls sh- were told that they should eat between 1,200 and 1,800 calories a day. And this kid is a multi-sport athlete. Like, during the same season, she's doing multi-sports. And so for her, 1,200 to 1,800 calories is simply not enough.
No.
And the teacher did not go into, that 1,200 to 18 calories basically is to keep you alive if you lie down all day and do nothing except maybe watch TV. And so
Right.
it just was such a gross oversight that had caused so much damage, and it was in
Yeah.
school. And
That's
anyway, I
very
just felt
frustrating.
it was super frustrating, but it felt really positive for me to be able to send her to your episode. And hopefully she continues to listen to the other episodes and also to my podcast as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And that comes back to our big web, Elizabeth, where, you know we don't factor in the fact that girls are athletes, right?
Right,
Like,
right, right.
who knows what the messaging was to the boys, but like the fact that you never even would consider that, like, oh, actually girls who are super active do need loads more calories than that, especially when they're growing. Like,
I
just,
know.
it makes me want to cringe when I think of because I remember being that age and being like, you're really self-conscious, your body is changing. And so you grab on to these facts that adults tell you. It's like, well, that must be the way. And
Mhm.
boy, I don't know about you, but I grabbed onto those facts hard.
Oh, of
It was just
course.
like,
But it was so interesting. So my coach was there as well, and she raced, and she's a tall, very strong woman, and she was a coach at a high school for a long time. And so, like, she would eat lunch in the lunchroom. She would get her lunch in the lunchroom, and she would sit down with her meal. And she's a triathlete, and she does a bazillion sports. She used to train. She was telling me she used to train during lunch hour. She would run up and down the bleachers. Anyway, so she was just like always running, and she was teaching these classes. And she would sit down with her hamburger and French fries, and invariably a bunch of the male teachers would come by and go, "Oh, you're eating French fries.
just like
You're eating so much." It's
right.
like it's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked about that before too, just the idea of a younger woman or a woman in general, like eating a lot of food and
Hmm.
how that is a thing. And it's like, no,
Right.
that is you being better at your sport.
Right. Right. Right.
And we need to make that connection for people, that it's like, no, that's how you get better. Like, that is how you fuel great performances. And it did make me realize, because I've done a few episodes around Red S, which is sort of the other side, like when you aren't menstruating, which is incredibly common with a
Hmm.
lot of athletes. We've talked about this. That's a big red flag for Red S, and it leads to all sorts of horrible things, and not least of which, and Camille mentions this, is poor bone health.
Right.
And as we've also talked about on this show, that poor bone health can be permanent if it happens during your developmental years. It is irreparable damage, as far as I've seen in the studies that I've read. And so these things are just like, they're just so critically important, to your overall well-being and health. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, this has been great. I've loved talking about your podcast, Strides Forward.
thank you.
Yeah, it's really awesome. We haven't talked about our episodes in a long time, so this was a great one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap it up unless you want to add anything else.
No, that's it. I just, I gotta say, I have been so touched by the positive feedback. I have not seen one negative comment, and I think that that's super meaningful. Because I didn't just share this myself. Like, a number of people have shared it. Camille has shared it, and so it's been out on social media. And I know a lot of people talk about trolling, and especially around subjects like this. I haven't seen one person say anything negative, or like, "Oh, you guys are gross," or like, just what you might imagine somebody might say. There's
Hmm.
been none of that. And it points to the reason why you and I decided to talk about this today, because it's like, oh no, this is really something that people want to talk about, because it's so important. And I think all of us have, I know Camille had been a little hesitant in the very beginning to talk about, like, that she had her period, and that it was all this positive feedback where she's like, oh, I should tell this whole story on a podcast. Uh and so, we got together and did my episode. Uh but I think everyone's been a little surprised that it has gotten so much positive feedback. And there've been so many women who have commented. And the one thing that she said, and it's right up top in the episode, is like, I've never missed a period. And when she said that to me, like, I didn't realize that before we started talking. I was absolutely floored. I got to tell you, because for somebody who's been an athlete as long as she has, doing the endurance sport that she does, that's rare, which is awful, by the way. but it's really rare. And people have been surprised. But that should be the standard.
It
And I
should be the
think that
standard.
that's
Yeah.
really the thing to that that should shine bright here. And one other thing that I will add is I had mentioned that I did these episodes about Red S because I'm like, we need to talk about Red S, and we do. Like, we really need to. But I think even more so, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about people doing it, like making good choices throughout their careers, and how awesome that is.
Well, how it
And it's
leads to
yeah,
success.
exactly how it leads to success. And it's absolutely important to talk about people who have gone through struggles with Red S. I by no means think that we shouldn't talk about that, or that those stories aren't really, really important. But it really struck me talking to Camille that it's just like, yeah, but also let's raise up these stories of
Yeah,
women
for sure.
who are, who this is on their radar. This is why it's important. This is how they do it. They go talk to their nutritionist. Like, she was only a few days late on her cycle, and the first thing she did was call her nutritionist. She had an appointment set up immediately. Like, let's troubleshoot this,
Right.
and it's like, and that's what you do.
Right.
And that is the priority. That was the other thing. It's not like, oh, I'm going to recover and then get back to training, or, there's lots of different priorities that you would have, especially she's a professional athlete. Like, this is her job. But this was her priority. And that's how important it is. And I just think it's great to see that message coming across. So that was the only thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up is that I think it's the reason I think it's important is because I think we get into this mode of, the only way I can be successful is to be light and lean. And so I
Right.
have to sort of push the envelope and, if I lose my period, okay, that's fine. But
Right.
if we hear more of these stories of women who are not doing that, are approaching it really differently, and are making sure always they get the nutrition that they need as an athlete, and are working really hard, uh, scientifically, and working with a team to make sure that's happening, and they are doing well in their sport, I think that's a really good example.
Well, and we should point out some of your episodes that point to this too, Elizabeth, because they're super, super strong in this realm. And one is the one with the nutritionist, who, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name.
Stephanie
Um,
Sherlink.
Thank you. Who works with the Trek team.
Yep.
And also your episode with Afrique, the Irish rower, who talked all about how, you know, they made a big point to, quite frankly, eat a ton of food, and because it was the nutrition they needed, because they train so much, and how they were getting stronger, and they didn't have to worry about, weight issues or this or that, because it just came off because they're training so much.
Right.
And they, and that wasn't the goal. They weren't like doing a weight loss thing. They were doing I want to go to the Olympics and kick ass, which they did. So
Right.
those were really great episodes on your side too. So I know, like, both of us have talked about this a lot and tried to get this message across, and we're not the only ones. Like, I've seen lots and lots
Sure.
of talk about, how important menstrual health is. And I just love, I love that we're both part of this conversation, and that we're actually
Yeah.
seeing some change. Like, it's super, super exciting to actually,
Yeah.
like, because I get really bummed out about these women, having Red S and injuries and poor bone health and all the other things that come with it. And it's just like, oh my God, but we can turn this tide. And that's
Yeah.
just super, super exciting. So we're ending on a high note,
Oh
Elizabeth.
my goodness, we're ending on a high note. I better wrap it up quickly.
Yes, please, please, quick.
All right. Well, this is Elizabeth from Hear Her Sports podcast, and I am with Cherie Turner from Strides Forward podcast. And this was another week of Cherie and Elizabeth Talk Sports. Thank you so much. We will see you again. Bye bye.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys. See you next week.